Great. Well, so excited to be here with you both for our local return community conversation series. So we've got Nessa Richman and Diane Lynch. Nessa's the network director and Diane is the chair of the Rhode Island Food Policy Council. So thank you both for taking some time today to chat. So I guess the first thing that we could say is just, to tell folks a little bit about the Food Policy Council and yeah, start there.
Sure. You want me to take that one, Diane? Okay. Yeah, the Food Policy Council is a statewide network of folks from all across our food system. So farmers, fishers, aquaculturists, food businesses, food access advocates, food justice workers, and kind of everyone who has a stake in our state's food system. And we've been around for 10 years now. And there's a very broad, big network of people who are working together. And our purpose is to create a more just and resilient food system for the ocean state, including environmental sustainability, economic vitality, and equity and accessibility for good food for all. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
And obviously clearly very aligned with the conversations that we're having at local return. Even a lot of the language that we're using is very similar. So so I guess that naturally flows into sort of in what we've talked about and what you've seen from local return, what resonates with you in the work that you're doing.
I'll start. As Nessa said, our focus is our state. It's our state network. It's within that every city and town, and within that every community, and within that every neighborhood, and then every family. And so we really are totally locally focused. And we know that we're part of a regional food system and a global food system. It's not that we have our heads buried in the sand about that, but we are choosing to focus on what's going on right here in our backyard and what can we do about that. And that's probably 80% of what we do. Mm-hmm. So I think in that respect, we're really aligned with local return. Mm-hmm. That's what our focus is. Mm-hmm.
And I would just add that, the councils worked together over many, many months to kind of create a strong commitment to equity. And a big piece of that is about economic justice and economic empowerment. And just an understanding that when wealth is owned by too few people within a society, then you have injustices that you really can't resolve unless there's a more equal distribution of resources and a more equal distribution of power in decision making about what the food system is going to look like. So that's I think also a piece that that feels resonant to me about what local return is trying to do.
Yeah. So any sort of projects or things that come to mind when you think of those, we're talking about, building resilience, equity, things that you would highlight from the work of the Food Policy Council. We mentioned actually a number of the local return community conversations we've had so far have been with Food Policy Council members or former Food Policy Council members. As you said, it's where the cool kids are. So, and I think should I say the disclaimer that I'm also the treasurer? I'm not of the Food Policy Council. So,
probably.
Yeah.
This is a Rhode Island story.
Yeah, right. Very.
I would just mention there are probably a dozen really good examples, but one that I've been really involved in has been with the seafood and the fishing community. And, that's a community of businesses and families and neighborhoods that have been really badly impacted by the development of a global supply chain over the last 50 years, which has squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. And one of the things that we've been able to do is by engaging directly with these fishermen that are still surviving, with the surviving parts of the sector, is work with them and figure out what they can do locally to make themselves more sustainable in the long run, because they do represent at this point, one of the most environmentally sustainable ways to be using ocean resources, as opposed to these really carbon intensive global supply chain links that have risen. And so it's great. This is a Rhode Island business sector. These are folks that are great stewards of the ocean. They can articulate what their needs are, and we can be the conduit for connecting them with the resources and the policies that will help them survive. And so that's one area that we've been working in for the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Nessa, does one come to mind for you in terms of anything you want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example of a specific project where, where I've seen some of this work be in alignment with what local return is trying to do. I would just kind of step back from that and say that the kind of core operation of the council itself is to bring people together in conversation, in network, getting to know each other who would really not have an opportunity to do that otherwise, to understand where their common ground is, and to be able to come into alignment sometimes on priorities and around projects and policies and partnerships, and that just by performing that function in and of itself, creating space for conversations to happen that would not happen otherwise, that in and of itself is in alignment with the statement of principles.
So and that kind of flows naturally. I mean, one of the things I get to dote on, Food Policy Council is an awesome organization, use awesome people to work with, is there's just this natural place where like food brings people together. Everyone's life, is touched by that, and it then also touches on community, and equity and justice and injustice issues, on local economy, on access, and the Food Policy Council. I think one of the things that's always been most impressive to me is the way that, organically builds that network and connects people across those different pieces of the food system, but then also does this sort of really key work in advancing those different goals that you talked about, equity, resilience, in really concrete ways for the fishing industry, for, food access. And so speaking of that, when you think of what kind of community you want to live in, what kind of communities you want to see in Rhode Island, both in your work and your life, what things stick out to you as the kind of community that you want to see?
Do you want me to take that one first, Diane?
Sure, I have to think about that.
I was thinking about this question because I've lived in lots of different kinds of communities, and they've all been different from each other. And I think that the kind of community that I want to live in, has to have component units that have a balance of independence and interdependence. So, just to note, where I live in Rhode Island, it's like swamp Yankee land, and everybody, has their generator and their big freezer in the basement. And if the power goes out for a week, they're going to be fine. They got their wood stove. And, a town that I used to live in Maryland, that was not the case. When the power went out, everybody was in everybody else's kitchen trying to help them, help them eat their food. You help them eat their food. They help you eat your food. There was a lot more interdependence. And so I think just a good balance of independence and interdependence of household units, would lead to the kind of community where you have more interconnection, between families, on the street, in the community, that
Right.
sort of thing.
Right.
I think that's a really hard question for me to answer. I think that there are a lot of wonderful attributes to the communities in Rhode Island. And there are a lot of really nasty ones as well. And I think that's the human race, not necessarily Rhode Islanders. But I think there's a big community of people here that would like their community relationships to be based on mutual trust and respect. And I think that's probably really goes a long way. Like the more of that we can develop, the more, and understanding, which involves interaction. Speaking to Nessa's point about, the freezer, the generator, the don't talk to me. So, you know, we just chip away at that, you know, respect and understanding and interaction, and you just keep pushing forward as much as you can.
Yeah. So this is I think one of my favorite questions that we're asking folks, which is if it were up to you, what's the next right thing that the state of Rhode Island should do in building local economies and community wealth?
Okay, I have an immediate answer to this one because
Yeah.
this is something I actually do think about weirdly. I would just take $15 million, which I know is a lot of money, and I would buy a whole bunch of land in cities, in suburbs, and I would give it to people that want to farm. That's what I would do.
I love that answer.
I think it would have amazing impacts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This might not be an original answer, but it's definitely in alignment with the Food Policy Council. I would want to see a lot more small grants flowing into our farm, fish, and food businesses to help them take their next steps toward economic viability, toward growth, toward even just getting established in the first place. You guys know that we are big advocates for our state's local agriculture and seafood act grant program, which has been doing an amazing job of that with a really relatively small amount of money just for farm and fisheries businesses. I would love to see the state of Rhode Island put a bunch of money into that program and extend it beyond farm and fish to also small food entrepreneurs and others who are trying to build up a local food system where everybody has the opportunity to participate.
That's great. Yeah, I think that we can say that definitely. I think a lot of things that we do as Food Policy Council, that and the state of Rhode Island, a lot of things, you look and you say small but mighty, but there's also these kinds of investments that we could make. We have this opportunity to make sort of huge investments with the some of the stimulus money that's coming as well. So. So how do you think, we talked a little bit about, how the work of the Food Policy Council advances local resilience, economic and community resilience. If you want to talk more about that in any specifics, but then also what the barriers that you face in doing that work are.
So the barrier that I find pops up in many different ways, so maybe calling it one barrier is not fair, is that the state as a whole has a very long history of really ineffective municipal and state level resources. So, and I've lived in states that also had this issue. New York State is another one. So this is not unique to Rhode Island. So over decades, municipal and state level planning and environmental management and regulatory, et cetera, they've not risen to a level of real sophistication or expertise to meet the needs of their communities. They've been bogged down, they've been under-resourced, sometimes they've been filled with corruption. And so you find that the meta network above us is often really difficult to deal with. It is not up to the task at all. And that can be a barrier in many different ways.
That's a great point. Nessa, your thoughts on barriers to the work that?
Yeah, the biggest barriers. I mean, I would get a little bit philosophical, I guess, with the biggest barriers and just say that I think a lot of them are internal. They're, failures of imagination, failures of creating space to make connection, and almost sometimes and too much of an attachment to outcome. So a lot of times when you're trying to do good work in the world, you may not succeed, or you may not succeed for many, many years. But so I think that a big barrier is just in kind of persisting in doing the work because it's what you're supposed to be doing, or participating in it, knowing that you might not see an outcome just because it is the right thing to do. And so I think that's probably a big barrier just for me personally, but I also think it's a big barrier for all of us. We all understand that we can make a positive difference, and it's hard to start out to do that when you know that you might fail or you might not know whether or not you succeed.
Mm-hmm. So I have a bonus question that I didn't tell you about, so hopefully you're not too caught off guard, but thinking about your work and the work in advancing equity as a key part of this, resilience and community building, I guess I wonder what comes to mind as the biggest challenges and opportunities in advancing equity as a real part of the resilience work that you're doing.
My impression is that ignorance, thousands of years of ignorance about the reality of the role that racism has played in our social fabric is it's mind-boggling. So, and that is no one individual's fault. That's a systemic issue, but it can only be solved one individual at a time. So every individual has to take responsibility for learning about, the reality of what's happened, not the narrative that they were given. And that's a huge barrier, because without knowledge, people see the world with very, very clouded vision about really what's going on. So it's a tough one.
Yeah, I think what popped into my mind first, Josh, with the bonus question is very aligned with what Diane said. I just kind of thought about it from a different standpoint, which is just the barrier of just not making time to listen, because listening is what's needed most. Just being present and absorbing information from people who've had different experiences than you have, and not prejudging what you're hearing, not guessing what you're going to hear, but just actually really listening to what you are being told and taking it in.
Thank you for going along with my bonus question. We've got a lightning round here of questions. So just what comes to mind when I say some of these things. So what's the first word or phrase that comes to mind when I say local?
Food.
Hyperlocal.
Hyperlocal and food. Good. What's your go-to local business?
I would say Casey Farm.
South County Bread Company.
Oh, nice. A newer one. And the first word or phrase that comes to mind when I say wealth?
Personal.
Distributed.
And we talked a little bit about this kind of before, but if you say what community means to you, the first word that comes to mind when you think of community?
Friendships.
Love.
And what's the thing that you see happening in Rhode Island that you're most excited about?
People coming back out of their houses.
Ooh, let's see. Farmers market starting up.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for taking the time. This was such a wonderful conversation, and I really, would love the opportunity to be able to expose more people to the Food Policy Council and the great people and the great work that's going on. If folks want to find out more, what's the best place to go looking online or elsewhere?
Our website is rifoodcouncil.org, and we have an awesome monthly newsletter that you can sign up for with just a click of a button at the bottom of that page.
Great. And I think all the contact information is on there.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the coolest things about the Food Policy Council is that there are so many different ways to get involved from so many different perspectives and types of work and communities. So people are really, I think we know how to engage folks. So
absolutely, we need everyone.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you both so much.
Thanks, Josh. This was fun.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, super fun.
Yeah. Take care.